Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Shayla Brown, an actor you might have caught in a small role on the Apple TV series See, or in the Crow's Nest production of George F. Walker's Orphans for the Czar in Toronto earlier this spring. She's about to be seen alongside Frances McDormand and Kira Galoyan in Sarah Polley's Women Talking, which opens in select theaters and at the TIFF Bell Lightbox this Friday, December 23rd. It's one of the best films I've seen this year, and you should check it out. Shayla picked Clemency, the 2019 drama from writer-director Chinonye Chukwu, whose new film Till just opened in theaters. Clemency stars Alfre Woodard as Bernadine Williams, a prison warden who prides herself on her professional demeanor and who's slowly cracking under the strain of running a death row penitentiary. Woodard is surrounded by a terrific supporting cast, including Wendell Pierce as Bernadine's exhausted husband, Aldous Hodge as the inmate whose impending execution gives the film its framework, and Richard Schiff as his attorney. But Clemency is Bernadine's story from start to finish, and Woodard carries it with one of the finest performances of her career. Trust us on this. This is Someone Else's Movie.
In my life, I had been very ignorant to the topic surrounding clemency. And the film doesn't hold back. It starts off with a botched execution it's very raw. And I think from the get-go, it makes you question everything, and it makes you go, how often does this happen? And then you're like, is this what we as humans do? And then I also think that as an actor, I chose it because it was the first story I saw with a lot of nuance. It really goes to show that if you look a little deeper, you can have empathy for everyone on every side of this story. I think even as children, we are conditioned to believe that there's a good side and a bad side, and this one shows that it's not black and white like that. Aren't we all victims of a bigger system and a bigger problem? And I think also that this film is really powerful because it tells a story very quietly. You don't need these big impassioned monologues or these huge scores, although they can be great. But this one, there's a lot of power in a look or the sounds around you. And it's very haunting like that. And I think as an actor, I had to learn the power in what isn't said to do women talking. So I think, it inspired me in life and it inspired me in work.
Yeah, I can absolutely see the connection there where Women Talking is a film with such monumental stakes for everybody, but no one really wants to talk about it. I mean, it's the whole point of the film. The concept is a conversation, an argument, a debate where everyone is very clearly positioned. They all know exactly how they feel, and they're trying to convince other people. Clemency, everything's already been said, right? Like everything's already been tried. We're at the end of his appeal process. We're watching someone prepare himself to not exist. But we're also watching the warden, the woman who is ultimately responsible for, I think she says at one point she's responsible for 1,000 bodies and keeping them safe. And the way she phrases that already tells me she's sort of checked out on their humanity. But we're watching her over and over again shut down the possibility of debate, shut down the possibility of conversation, the possibility of consolation with everyone she encounters. She never gives anything back to anyone. And Alfre Woodard is so good at carrying that poise and that position and still showing us just how much pain she's in and how she's just coming apart.
Yeah. Fun fact, she was like one of the first actors I worked with.
Oh, yeah?
On a show called See. I did a day player job on that. And I met her, and she's so powerful in that way. It's so effortless. And, I wanted to be able to do that, to just, have it all out there without even having to say anything and just like keeping it on the inside.
And not everyone can. Like, it's really interesting to watch someone who can do it effortlessly, to just sort of walk into a space and instantly we know exactly how she feels, even though she's not giving anything away. I mean, it's not a comic performance in any way. There's no, the one scene where she's sort of drunk and trying to be playful, it just hurts. Where you're watching her coworker try to talk her down and keep her from getting in her car after the bar scene. And it's all just this cry for help that she doesn't even know how to articulate. Like, she doesn't know how to express what she's feeling. And by the midpoint of the movie, it became really clear to me that she can't even begin to confront what she's feeling, because if she does, she'll fall apart.
Yeah. And her job, I think she's so used to detachment, that you have to stay that way to keep yourself doing it. And by the end, we see that fall apart, where I think it's I know it's a job that you have to be able to balance work and life. And in this kind of job that Bernadine is doing, she can't. Like, because you go home and you see these men in people who pass on the streets because they're humans.
The film treats every character as worthy of the camera's attention. I think that's the real skill in a story like this, is that there is a version of this movie where we never see the inmates, where it's just her story. And then there's a version, the one we've all seen, the death row movie, where we never see the warden except as some looming presence in the background during the execution, and it's all about the prisoners. And yeah, all the sides are exhausted, all the arguments are done. It doesn't even really matter at this point if he's guilty or not. He insists he's innocent right up until the end. And something about Aldous Hodge's performance makes me believe that even if the script thinks something else, the character believes it. And that makes it just crushing to watch him be destroyed, be extinguished even before he's killed by the state. But just the process has already worn him down. There's that moment where he tries to kill himself, like bashes his head against his cell wall and screams that he gets to decide when he dies. And the authority, the autonomy, the single thing you can choose to do, like a person can end their own, that has been taken away years ago. And now you're just watching the husk of this guy get shuffled from person to person. And when he's with Bernadine, he can't get the connection that he so desperately needs, that everybody else is giving him. Richard Schiff is so endlessly compassionate as an actor, and his character, who says, "You're the last guy, it's over, I can't do this anymore," seems to be an admission that it's broken him to watch this man lose those appeals, but he's still trying to be cheerful. Like the spirit is there in their scenes together. We feel the relationship that they've built. And then we come back to Bernadine, who we see is desperate for some kind of connection, but just can't allow it to happen. And she shuts herself down every single time. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I think that what really made me question the whole system, and we don't have it here in Canada, but we see it happen. And since this film, I've seen, I've watched more people be executed. I think, like, every human being is entitled to not be tortured, but this is torture, because we are taking away people's autonomy and their ability to choose when they die, and making them wait for it, this specific moment, this very choreographed routine of death that is, in itself sickening. But the lead up to it, and how everything must go at this time, and that's psychological torture in itself. And I think that's really what made me question everything, was not even death itself, but the lead up to death, how they lose every bit of humanity that they have.
I mean, I suppose having the date of your own execution years in advance, knowing when it's going to come, is the start of it, but it's nowhere near the end. You just have to live with it. So I'm going to roll back a little bit, because I realized I didn't ask those people, for the listeners. I mean, you're fairly young. Did you see this movie when it came out? Was that your first in 2019? I mean, I had the chance to see it at TIFF, so that's when I saw it. But when did you catch up to it?
I think I saw it It was actually I shouldn't have watched it when I did. It was like Christmas of 2020.
Okay.
Um, I was looking for something to watch, and I was like, well, you just worked with Alfre Woodard. Let's see what she's been doing. And so I watched this film, and I was like, oh my God, Merry Christmas, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't stop thinking about it for the next like few weeks. And then that like catapulted me into like trying to learn as much as I could about death row. And because like I had really no idea what happens. And then like I started reading Sister Helen Prejean's book, Dead Man Walking.
Mm-hmm.
I read all of her books because she's, been an spiritual consultant for men on death row.
Yeah.
And it fascinated me, and it also terrified me.
It's one of those things where I'm going to get heavy, I guess. The barbarism of American society just keeps coming out. Like, you can't have a conversation about the death penalty without almost immediately degenerating into the systemic racism and the strange, like this weird Puritan bloodlust for vengeance that is at the heart of the American experiment, where the idea that a man must pay with his life for it's Old Testament stuff, and the exhaustion, the weariness in Clemency feels so deliberate to me. We haven't even really discussed what Chinonye Chukwu brings to the film, and her vision for this exhausted, emptied space where the arguments are all past and everybody's given up. And by, as you say, we open with this botched execution, which shows you exactly how barbaric and awful this thing is. But there are also these subtle hints too that there's a space in the room where they don't care anymore. Like, the people doing it are just trying to cope. The med tech panics, and the priest is trying to be helpful, but the question of whether this is morally right or not is long since resolved. They can't. It's not. They've all convinced themselves that they can't have that conversation at this point, I think, which is how it keeps going, which is how everyone keeps accepting it. Well, we have it, so let's just do it as efficiently as possible and as humanely as possible, without acknowledging how incredibly inhumane the whole thing is.
And acknowledging how it's not just, if someone kills someone, then they get the death penalty, because we know that's not true. It's poor people and people of color who get the death penalty. But we look at the public perception, and white men and women probably, we know that they get off easier. And I think, this film, when you go inside the prison, everyone is given up and they're defeated, and whatever qualms they have about it, it doesn't matter, because again, they're victims of a larger system. But then you look outside the prison, and the only glimpse that we get is the protesters out there who are shouting, and no one's going to hear them.
Yeah, or they're making a specific effort not to listen, right? I mean, people turn away from them. People roll their windows up and just ignore it, because that's part of the world they live in too, and they've gotten used to it and don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
And then they go right on killing people. It's a film about the mundane reality of executions, of incarceration, and the absence of clemency, really, which is why I think Woodard's performance is so pleading, so internally desperate, that she wants it for herself almost as much as she wants it for anyone else, but she just can't. There's a statement early on in the film that this will be her 13th execution, that she's overseen 12 of them. And maybe we're supposed to buy into 13 being unlucky, or some kind of other thing that's playing in her mind about how this is enough. Her husband tells her that the job is crushing her and killing their marriage, and he's clearly right. Like, he's not wrong. But Wendell Pierce, who is just one of the most empathetic performers, just, he can find a rhythm with any co-star and make himself, he's got the emotional intelligence to make himself a mentor or a counselor if need be. And the idea that this man is trying to do that for the woman he loves, the wife he's been married to for however long, and he's burning out. Like, her burning out is burning him out as well, and she can't even see that. Nobody gets out well in this thing. It crushes everyone.
Yeah, and I think because she sees their humanity, regardless of whether she wants to acknowledge it or not, because the people on death row are so often men of color, and she's a woman of color, and I think she, whether it's unconscious or not, she knows that they have lives and families and have experienced the same things that she did. So she can't help but have this humanity and compassion for them that she can never extend. And when you can't acknowledge it or extend compassion, it just becomes trapped in you and slowly just burns you out.
And again, Alfre Woodard, just by standing there and not looking away, creates this space between herself and us where she's doing one thing for the entire film. She's suffering. Actually, in the wake of Dead Man Walking, which is a Tim Robbins film of it, of the adaptation of Prejean's book, which is so quietly religious. Like, Prejean is there as a facilitator. She'll pray for people, but she won't force religion on them. She's just a presence. How does she put it? She wants to be a face of love. The last thing they see is compassion and love. And this is the opposite of that. This is someone who believes that it's her job not to show any emotion, to professionally distance and treat people with respect. Like, she's not cruel about it. She hasn't hardened into something awful, but she's giving a performance of professionalism that is the worst thing you can do in that situation, because she's doing it for the families as well as for the men in her care, and she's giving nothing back and trying to remain professional. And there is a sort of a practice kindness when she asks people what their last words should be, when she asks for their statements. There's the sense that she's softening herself a little bit to be kindly, but she turns it off again as soon as she leans away, which I find just an amazing little performance note, that she can just pretend to be nice in those moments to give them what she thinks they need. But even that steps back 2 steps, right? Like, that's a decision she made before she ever met this person, that this is how it has to be treated. So she's just turning them into machinery.
Mm-hmm. I think we don't talk about the brutality of execution enough. I didn't even know how it was done. And this movie goes straight into it, and how brutal it is, and how, medical professionals don't perform this stuff because they have morality clauses and stuff like that, where you have to treat with the intent to heal, not the intent to kill. So how do we know the people who are doing these executions actually know what they're doing, and can actually do it without causing more pain and trauma to the people? And the truth is that we don't know that. Obviously, when this film opens on the botched execution, it made me go, well, how often does this happen in real life? And a quick Google search showed me that it's not uncommon for things to go wrong. And I thought, well, why don't we hear about it? It's because people don't want to hear about it. But we have to acknowledge that these things go wrong all the time. And why are we just okay with that?
Yeah, well, again, it's that collective thing, right? Like, if society has decided that someone will kill this person, we don't have to think about it anymore. There's a drama with Timothy Spall as Pierrepoint, who was the last hangman in England, and how he was just a miserable, empty shell of a man. Timothy Spall, again, is such an empathetic actor that you can just watch him hollowing himself out from the inside to be forcing this smile on while he puts people through the most horrible thing. And then, of course, there's a question of why anyone would do this. It's asked in the film straight up, like, how can you do this to people? And what does this do to you? And she just tells people it's her job. Like, that's the commitment that you make. Because by the time I think you accept that this is the way you're going to carry out your career, this is where you've ended up, then you've already made whatever compromises, or you think you have. And that's why Clemency works, because we're watching the system break everyone, and how she finally can't pretend it doesn't hurt anymore.
Yeah. And I think when we see her at the end of the film, and I think at the beginning it's a contrast because she's so responsive and she knows exactly what needs to be done, and by the end, like, nobody's asking her questions, she's telling everyone what to do, and by the end she's silent and she can't move, and people are asking her questions because they need her to go ahead, and she can't do it anymore.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to tell you about the latest Shiny Things newsletter, my twice-weekly dispatch about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming thing. Last week, I reviewed Patrick Reed Johnson's 52577 and the new 4K editions of Silent Running, Coraline, Paranorman, and Smile, and Criterion's Michael Haneke trilogy on Blu-ray, just for funsies. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Twitter account. Did you miss me writing about movies? I did. Come check it out. The film is not going gently on Bernadine, but it's fully aware of how much the story, the impact, all of it, the emotions hang on Woodard's performance, especially in those two kind of married shots, the one of her in the chamber and the one of her outside when it's over. There's no dialogue. She breathes. Her nose runs, like you have the time to realize in a theater. It must have been devastating. I wasn't lucky enough to see it on a big screen. I watched it on a projector, but nowhere near as impactful as it would have been in a movie theater with an audience. We have so much time to watch her go through it, and then at the very end, your heart is in your throat waiting to see what she does, how she processes it. And I think the choice to cut it off before we actually see her make her choice. I mean, we know you can, like, Woodard is so good at that just when she exhales, like, I know where it's going, but it ends at the perfect moment. And to hold in the darkness, I was terrified that would come up and it would something, like 3 years later and she's an advocate or something, or she's on CNN, some terrible way of showing us that everything is going to be all right, but leaving it hanging is so much more powerful.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, that encapsulates perfectly how death row works, is like these constant appeals, and maybe things are going to be okay. Oh, they're not. And, you're constantly left on this like hanging thread of not knowing what's going to happen next and if things are actually going to be okay. And I think ending the film at that moment really encapsulates that and kind of leaves you in the mindset of these people, of all of these people.
Well, except for Anthony, of course, who doesn't get the chance, that sounded facile, but I really mean it. I mean, you feel his absence too, because we don't watch his execution through the camera. We don't see it. We don't experience it the same way we experienced the first one. We just watch it all play out on Bernadine's face, and we see the emotions that she's been trying to suppress, and we see the horror at what's happening, just the way her face contorts. It's so unselfconscious too, as an actor, that her entire composure just collapses, and it does so in a way that doesn't feel showy. It doesn't feel like that moment where people sort of gasp and start to tear up, that actorly trick that we've all gotten used to.
Yeah.
It's just this natural breaking down of first her barriers and then her composure, and it's just so powerful and so quiet.
I saw a tweet that was like, her crying is really ugly. And it's like, well, that's very human crying. Like, I see, actors all the time, crying pretty, like,
yeah.
But like, she's got snot running down her nose and into her mouth. And it's like, yeah, because that's what happens when your composure breaks to the point where you don't even care. you just experience those emotions, and all these tides that you've been trying to hold back suddenly crash, and you don't even know what to do with yourself. And that felt very human, is that her emotions are just all there, and there's no show of it. It's just on her face, crying like a human would.
Yeah, I mean, I think about there's probably some kind of list somewhere. I'm sure it's on Wikipedia of the like the best screen weepers or something. Like it's a BuzzFeed list. But I think about people like Julianne Moore, who reliably cries convincingly, but she's so good at it that directors keep getting her to do it, and so it almost feels like it's becoming overused. That you can just tell it's like, oh, this is the scene where they figured she could save it by crying. They fix a weak script by just breaking down. And it's like, yep, that's the scene because it's an amazing skill and she can do it. Or someone like Juliet Stevenson. Have you seen Truly Madly Deeply?
No, I haven't.
It's this exquisite movie about grief, and it features Alan Rickman as a ghost who comes back to comfort his partner and help her 2 years after he dies, to help her get over him. But now, of course, watching Alan Rickman play a ghost is just way too sad. But Juliet Stevenson opens the film by breaking down in her therapist's office over the death of her partner 2 years earlier, and she just full on weeps and blathers, and it's like it was. Critics at the time were saying that like it seems unfair to have the camera pressed right up into her face from underneath her chin as snot runs out of her nose. But she and Anthony Minghella, the filmmaker, both insisted on doing it that way because they knew that was as real as it could be. And if you're not uncomfortable when you see, I think that's what it is. If you as an audience member aren't slightly uncomfortable when you see someone this miserable, then the performance isn't connecting, or the movie is just playing you, because we should be feeling it.
Yeah, I don't want to see something that's rehearsed, or like, something that, oh Lord, we've seen this before. I want it to feel real in whatever the way that actor can make it real. And if that's the way that it's gonna happen, then I want to see it, because that's how we feel for them.
Yeah. The obvious place for me to take this now is Women Talking, where so much of the film is people, specifically women, being as honest and real and emotional and earnest as they can be with one another in this horrible situation. And I know that, Sarah's a friend, and she was telling me just how careful she was to make sure everyone was in a good place to get to the places they needed to be in the film. But what's it like to be that close to those performances? And you have to give one yourself as well. And the way the film widens up, it opens with this simple, close one-on-one, two shots kind of composition, and then it just gets bigger and bigger until we're in the barn with everyone, with these incredible, powerful monologues flying back and forth, and these passionate, infuriated performances. How do you match that energy? How do you find the performance within yourself to sort of be there with them?
I think working with the energy of other people is really important for me.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I'm auditioning, I need to have a reader that's going to give me something to work with. And so I found it really natural to push myself to these places, because I was in a cast of people who you could tell genuinely cared about each other. And when you feel safe enough to do that, it helps more than you would know. Like I don't think I would have been able to bring out this performance with people I didn't trust completely. And I think that, I was intimidated at first because I looked at the cast and I went, oh my God, I'm with Claire Foy, and Frances McDormand is my grandmother. I am terrified. But they're really lovely people. And the set had no ego. There was no person who was a diva or anything. Like everyone's just real, genuine, down to earth people. And so, when it came time to do those performances, it was a lot easier than I was expecting it to be.
So was there one day or one moment where there wasn't that intense like connection? Did you ever have to sort of find a way to feel it?
Yeah, I remember there was a day when I had done a dance competition the day before, and then I came on set at 4 a.m. and I was like, I'm so exhausted. How am I going to do this? And of course, it was the day we were doing close-ups, and it was like, great. And so I had to really be patient with myself and like tell myself, look, this is how it's going to be. It's not going to be as seamless as it was a week ago, but we're going to get there. And I think I was working with Kate Hallett at that time. We were doing our exit for the Hayloft, where she runs up to me and I say, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And that wasn't a planned moment. It just started happening. And then they were like, let's do close-ups on that. So that day, to have that happen where you're just tired or like you can't connect emotionally, you have to be gentle with yourself. And I think working with Kate, who is also a younger actor, we're both newer to the industry. It was easier to have that like forgiveness. It's like we're both teenagers and we're both going through things, and we're just gonna have to work with that.
Yeah, and you do have, as your director, one of sort of the most outspoken advocates for child actors or young actors to be treated well rather than processed by the industry the way she was. So I know that was, I hope that would have been helpful. I know she was making the effort.
Yes, she was. And I think she's the best person to work with child actors because she's seen how wrong things can go. And I think she tries to make sure that every child who's on that set is a child who wants to be there.
Yeah, she said that about her own kids too, that they would get tired of her explaining that you can go home at any time if you don't feel comfortable being here. They're like, that was your childhood, not ours. And I find that really fascinating that every parent ends up with a kid that wants to do the thing that the parent doesn't want them to do on some level.
Yeah, I think, I've met with her kids, and Eve was like, so what is it like being a child actor? I was like, oh, you're trying to get me to get your mom to feel a bit better about you doing this, aren't you? I think that something that was really difficult for me about women talking was I'm so used to using my voice. Mm-hmm. And we in this movie, the Jan's family represents the people who can't speak, who don't have these words yet. And so having to play these emotions using just using things that aren't lines was terrifying to me. And as a blind person, I also was like I can't look at myself and go, oh, that looks realistic. I just had to trust my gut and my instincts, and that was really terrifying. But I think it in the long run, it ultimately showed me that I was an actor first, and that's how Sarah made me feel, is that you're not here because you're blind, you're here because you're a good actor. And I think I haven't felt that way all the time. Sometimes I feel like I'm just there to be the person that people look at and they go, look, we have representation. But it didn't feel that way for Sarah. And I want that to happen more, where it's just like, I'm just here to play a character, and we don't have to really talk about my blindness much, and we can just, act.
Yeah, it's just a facet of who she is.
Yeah.
My thanks to Shayla Brown, who you can see alongside Frances McDormand and Kira Galoyan in Sarah Polley's Women Talking, opening in select theaters this Friday, December 23rd, including the TIFF Bell Lightbox in Toronto. We've got something special planned for opening night. You might want to come down for the 7 p.m. show on Friday. You can find Shayla on Twitter at Soprano Shayla, all one word, SopranoShayla. And you can find Clemency on DVD from Universal Studios Home Entertainment and streaming on Hollywood Suite On Demand, Sundance Now, and AMC Plus in Canada, and on Hulu and Canopy in the US. It's also available to rent or buy on various VOD platforms. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of someone else's movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can, and happy holidays. I'll see you next week.